Thousands of people joined nationwide protests Saturday against the government's plans to chain country's judiciary, and protest organizers pledged to continue their fight after several terrorist attacks and a barrage rockets. Demonstrations in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and elsewhere began with a minute's silence for the 3 people who lost their lives in 2 separate suspected attacks on Friday. Protest organizers have accepted a request by the police to cancel routine marches and road-blocking efforts to keep roads open in case there is another security incident after the Tel Aviv rally. The S of 20-year-old Maya D and 15-year-old Rina D from Efrat settlement in West Bank in a near the Hamra settlement on Friday cast a shadow over protests. Hours later, Alessandro Perini, a 35-year-old Italian national from Rome, was killed in a suspected ramshackle attack in Tel Aviv. Despite rise in terrorism and Passover, attendance remained relatively high, with media reports showing 140,000 people attending the Tel Aviv demonstration and tens of thousands more in smaller demonstrations around country. Hundreds of thousands of people are holding weekly mass protests in Tel Aviv and across country against government's plans for judicial overhaul, and demonstrations continue despite halting law late last month to allow dialogue over coalition's highly divisive efforts to undermine justice system. We will continue our protest against dictatorship as if there is no war on terror. We will continue to come for reserve and support IDF security forces as if there is no war against dictatorship, protest organizers said. A phrase. Tel Aviv from the sky pic. Twitter SMCAUFX07A, Noga Tarnopolsky April 8, 2023 Police said on Saturday that thousands of police were deployed the protests and urged demonstrators not to block roads, disturb the peace, or interfere with police trying to do their duty. They also urged the public to report anything suspicious. During the Passover holiday, protesters held banners that read, "Leave my people," at various demonstrations, representing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Pharaoh of Egypt, a reference Moses' biblical plea the Pharaoh allow Israeli slaves leave Egypt. Speaking at the rally in Tel Aviv, former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon urged opposition leaders, "Don't try to save Netanyahu with a rotten compromise that undermines democracy in the name of false responsibility." Many in opposition say they suspect the government is being insincere in its attempts to reach a negotiated settlement after Netanyahu said he was stopping law. Citing Netanyahu's ongoing accusations of corruption, Ya'alon said, "The accused has been warned thousands of times that his obsessive plan to turn Israel into a dictatorship poses an immediate and existential danger to Israel's security. Look at Russian President Vladimir Putin's miserable army, and you'll understand. That's what a dictatorial army is without honest reporting and code," he said. "The dictatorship is undermining strategic alliance with United States, our enemies are watching, and deterrence is eroding," he said, describing government's failures as 1,000 times more serious than failure of horrific Yom Kippur War. "Democracy will win. Israel will not be a dictatorship," he said. 75 pic. Twitter's DKBQPR2M. Ran Boker 8 near Tel Aviv rally, Supreme Court Chief Esther Hayed was greeted with enthusiastic applause as she attended a concert marking 75th anniversary of Jevitron Folk Singers Group at Charles Bronfman Auditorium. In a landmark speech 3 months ago, Hayed denounced the Netanyahu coalition's plan to overhaul Israel's judiciary and legal system, saying it would deal a blow to Israel's democratic identity. April 14, 2023, Haaretz pic. Twitter called 6 ZPP Tzipi Livni, a former foreign minister, pressured government in Herzliya over timing of divisive law, as country faced many security threats. "If truly believe Israel's security requires unity, all that is required of you is to explain would rather have control over terrorism than take control of the courts," he said. The government made up of those who think that being in government is more valuable than equality, because when they're equality they will have to serve in the IDF fight terrorism like we do, and the women will be free LGBTQ people. "We'll have known the families," added Livni. Pic. Twitter K1 Coerpo, Tzipi Livni. April 8, 2023. Demonstrators in Haifa were joined by former head of the Israel Defense Forces Military Intelligence Agency, Amos Malka, and former Likud minister, Meir Shitrit. Shitrit told crowd that the country faces a clear and present danger of destruction of democracy. The Knesset has been a rubber stamp for government for many years, said Shitrit, referring to Israel's unicameral system, where the government alone is elected by a majority in 120-member Knesset. Noting controversial plan to allow an absolute majority in 61 Knesset, he said, "The court is only institution that protects ordinary citizens from government tyranny, and that's what government wants to abolish with an override clause. Members will overturn the Supreme Court decision." What happened to Bibi? What happened to Likud? Are you crazy? I've been on Likud for 32 years. The government wants send LGBTQs back to the closet, turn us into a racist country, he said. They may disqualify their parties. They may decide tomorrow that we, anarchists, cannot vote. Noting that 10 out of 12 Supreme Court justices were elected by Likud governments, Shitrit condemned government's attempts not to portray judiciary as representative of right. What you have been told about the court is a lie. Earlier, a group of demonstrators in Tel Aviv repeated a similar protest that occurred last week, reviving the National Guard forces proposed by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Critics claimed that power could mean the minister's private militia. Protesters held a silent march in the city of Rehovot in memory of those killed on Friday. Despite calmer nature of the demonstrations on Saturday night, Walla news site reported that a group of people passing by demonstrators poured water on them at Beit HaJunction in northern Israel. Walla reported that police arrested 4 suspects who tried to escape. In response, Israel launched a series of airstrikes on Hamas targets in Gaza and struck the group's infrastructure in southern Lebanon, where it is among Palestinian refugee camps. There have been other attacks the West Bank last Saturday, which 3 soldiers were injured, a car crash, and 2 more were injured. Separate gun attacks on Wednesday and Thursday. Netanyahu reportedly told his security cabinet this week that Israel is trying to avoid escalating conflict on several fronts while the government is thwarted by widespread domestic opposition. According to a report by Channel 12 on Friday, Netanyahu said Israel should avoid being dragged into conflicts and wider conflicts and present a united front. The protests have shown no signs of waning since Netanyahu paused the revision law. Last Saturday, hundreds thousands took to streets demanding that coalition shelve bills altogether, instead of suspending law in order to weaken courts and politicize election judges, while warning that bills may soon be back on agenda.